My family humiliated me at my sister's wedding. 3 years later, I signed the prenup they feared. My name is Sarah, and I need to tell you about the day that changed everything. My sister Emma's wedding day in June 2021. It was supposed to be a celebration of love and family unity at the Riverside Country Club in Connecticut, but instead, it became the day my own family destroyed me in front of everyone who mattered. I had spent months preparing for Emma's big day. As her older sister, I wanted everything to be perfect. I coordinated with vendors, helped with dress fittings, and even took time off from my marketing job to handle last-minute details. Emma seemed grateful, always texting me about how much my help meant to her. I thought we were closer than ever. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early at the venue. The Connecticut summer air was thick with humidity, and the elegant gardens of the country club were in full bloom. White roses and hydrangeas decorated every corner, creating the fairy tale atmosphere Emma had always dreamed of. I felt proud knowing I had helped make this vision come true. But something felt off from the moment I walked into the bridal suite. Emma barely acknowledged me, surrounded by her bridesmaids, college friends I'd never been close to. My mother, Linda, was bustling around in her navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress, directing photographers and giving orders. When she saw me, her smile seemed forced. "Oh, Sarah's here," she said as if I were an afterthought. "Emma, honey, your sister's finally arrived." Finally arrived? I was 30 minutes early. But I brushed it off, assuming pre-wedding stress was getting to everyone. I should have paid attention to that first red flag. The ceremony was beautiful. Emma looked radiant in her off-white gown as she walked down the aisle with our father, Robert. Her new husband, Michael, couldn't take his eyes off her. They exchanged vows under a floral arch overlooking the Connecticut River, and for a moment, I forgot about the strange tension from the morning. The real nightmare began at the reception. During the cocktail hour, I noticed people glancing at me strangely. My Aunt Margaret, whom I'd always been close to, seemed to avoid eye contact. My cousins, usually chatty with me, gave polite but distant hellos. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. Then came the speeches. My father stood up first, champagne glass in hand, his usually commanding presence filling the room. He talked about Emma's childhood, her achievements, her bright future with Michael. He painted a picture of the perfect daughter. Smart, beautiful, successful. The room hung on every word. "Emma has always been our shining star," he said, his voice carrying across the reception hall. "From the day she was born, we knew she was destined for greatness. She graduated summa cum laude from Yale, landed her dream job at Goldman Sachs, and now she's marrying a wonderful man from an equally accomplished family." The applause was thunderous. Then he paused and I thought he might mention me, his other daughter. Instead, he concluded, "We couldn't be prouder of our daughter, our successful daughter, and the life she's built." Our daughter. Singular. As if I didn't exist. But that was just the beginning. My mother's speech came next, and it was even worse. She talked about raising her daughter to be independent and accomplished. She mentioned Emma's academic achievements, her career success, her ability to marry well. Every word felt like a deliberate exclusion of me from the family narrative. The final blow came from Emma herself. When she stood to give her thank you speech, I expected at least a small acknowledgement of my help with the wedding planning. Instead, she thanked everyone who made this day possible in the most generic terms. She mentioned our parents, Michael's family, her bridesmaids, even the wedding planner. She talked about the unconditional support of her family without ever looking in my direction. Then she said something that will haunt me forever. "I'm so grateful to be surrounded by successful, accomplished people who truly understand what it means to build a meaningful life. Today, I'm joining not just Michael's family, but a community of people who share our values and aspirations." The implication was clear. I wasn't part of that community. I wasn't successful enough, accomplished enough, worthy enough to be considered real family. The whispers started during dinner. I caught fragments of conversations at nearby tables. Something about my failures, my disappointments, how I was the black sheep of the family. Apparently, while I thought I was helping plan Emma's wedding, my family had been telling everyone a very different story about me. I learned later that they'd been spreading rumors for months. They told relatives and family friends that I was irresponsible with money, that I'd dropped out of college. I hadn't. I graduated with a bachelor's degree from UConn. That I was living paycheck to paycheck and constantly asking them for help, also untrue. They painted me as the family failure who couldn't get her life together. The worst part was realizing how carefully orchestrated this humiliation was. This wasn't just wedding day stress or oversight. This was a deliberate campaign to erase me from the family success story, to position Emma as the only daughter worth celebrating. As the evening wore on, the isolation became unbearable. I sat at a table with distant relatives who barely spoke to me, watching my sister dance with our father, watching my mother beam with pride, watching a family celebration that had no place for me in it. I left before the cake cutting. I couldn't bear to watch Emma and Michael feed each other wedding cake while my absence went completely unnoticed. I drove home to my small apartment in Hartford, tears streaming down my face, replaying every painful moment of the day. That night, alone in my bedroom, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let my family's version of me become my reality. I wasn't going to accept their narrative that I was worthless, unsuccessful, or unworthy of love and respect. I didn't know it then, but that humiliating wedding day was actually the beginning of my transformation. Sometimes you need to be completely broken down before you can build yourself back up stronger than ever. The weeks following Emma's wedding were the darkest of my life. I kept replaying that humiliating day over and over, analyzing every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment I was made to feel invisible in my own family. The Connecticut summer heat felt suffocating as I went through the motions of my daily routine, but inside I was completely numb. My phone stayed silent. No calls from my parents asking how I was doing. No text from Emma thanking me for all the wedding planning help. No check-ins from relatives who had witnessed my public humiliation. It was as if I had never existed at all. I threw myself into work at the small marketing firm where I was an account coordinator. My boss, Janet, noticed my increased dedication but also my withdrawn demeanor. During our weekly one-on-one meetings in her corner office overlooking downtown Hartford, she'd ask if everything was okay. I'd give her the standard "just tired" response, but I could tell she wasn't buying it. 3 weeks after the wedding, I finally broke down. Janet had just praised my work on a challenging client campaign, and something about receiving genuine recognition made me realize how starved I'd been for any kind of acknowledgement. I started crying right there in her office and the whole story came pouring out. Janet listened without judgment as I told her about the wedding, about my family's systematic campaign to erase me from their narrative, about feeling like I wasn't good enough for the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. She handed me tissues and waited patiently as I composed myself. "Sarah," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, "you're allowing other people to define your worth. I've watched you work here for 2 years. You're talented, reliable, and creative. The problem isn't you. It's that you're surrounded by people who need to diminish you to feel better about themselves." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. For the first time since the wedding, I started to see the situation clearly. My family hadn't humiliated me because I was a failure. They'd humiliated me because they needed a scapegoat, someone to contrast against Emma's supposed perfection. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I sat down with a notebook and wrote out everything I'd accomplished in my 26 years. I graduated college with a 3.4 GPA while working part-time to pay my own expenses. I'd been financially independent since age 22, never asking my parents for money despite their later claims. I'd earned 2 promotions at work and had glowing performance reviews. I'd saved up enough money to put a down payment on my own apartment. None of these achievements were glamorous or impressive by my family's standards. I wasn't an Ivy League graduate working on Wall Street like Emma. But they were real and they were mine, and I'd earned them through my own hard work and determination. Looking at that list, I realized something profound. I didn't need my family's approval to have value. Their rejection said more about them than it did about me. The real turning point came in August when I ran into my college friend Jessica at a coffee shop in West Hartford. Jessica and I had lost touch after graduation, but she remembered me as confident and ambitious. When she asked how I was doing, I found myself telling her the truth about the wedding and its aftermath. Jessica's reaction surprised me. She was furious, not at me but for me. "Sarah, that's psychological abuse," she said, her voice rising enough that other customers glanced over. "What your family did to you was calculated and cruel. No one deserves to be treated that way." She invited me to join her book club, a group of professional women in their 20s and 30s who met monthly to discuss everything from literature to career development to personal growth. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The book club became my lifeline. These women didn't know my family's version of me. They only knew the person I showed up as: thoughtful, articulate, insightful. They valued my opinions and perspectives. Slowly, I started to remember who I was before my family convinced me I wasn't good enough. One of the women, Maria, was a financial advisor. During one of our meetings in September, she mentioned that she was looking for someone to help with marketing for her growing practice. The position paid significantly more than my current job and offered opportunities for professional development. "I think you'd be perfect for this," she told me after the meeting. "You understand people, you're creative with problem solving, and you communicate clearly. Those are exactly the skills I need." I got the job. For the first time in my life, I was working somewhere that actively invested in my growth and success. Maria became not just my boss but a mentor who believed in my potential. She encouraged me to pursue additional certifications in digital marketing and financial communications. As fall turned to winter, I started to rebuild my life completely. I moved to a better apartment in a nicer neighborhood of Hartford. I began working out regularly, taking care of my physical and mental health. I started dating again, something I'd avoided for months after the wedding because I felt too damaged and worthless. The most important change was internal. I stopped checking my family's social media obsessively, looking for signs that they missed me or regretted how they treated me. I stopped crafting imaginary conversations where I confronted them about their behavior. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to come. Instead, I focused on building a life that made me genuinely happy. I discovered that without my family's constant criticism and comparison, I actually liked myself. I was funny, intelligent, and capable. I had good instincts about people and situations. I was worthy of respect and love. By December, almost 6 months after the wedding, I was a completely different person. I still carried the hurt from that day, but it no longer defined me. I had transformed it into fuel for my own growth and success. I had no idea that an even bigger transformation was about to begin, one that would eventually give me the ultimate validation I never knew I needed. December in Hartford brought an early snowfall that blanketed the city in pristine white. I was walking out of a high-end restaurant downtown after a successful client dinner when my life changed forever. The meeting had gone incredibly well. We just secured a major account that would significantly boost Maria's financial advisory firm, and by extension my own career prospects. I was checking my phone for an Uber when I literally bumped into someone coming out of the building next door. My purse scattered its contents across the snowy sidewalk, and I immediately dropped to my knees to gather everything up, embarrassed by my clumsiness. "I'm so sorry," said a warm, deep voice with a slight British accent. "Here, let me help you with that." I looked up to see a man in an expensive charcoal coat bending down to help collect my scattered belongings. He was probably in his early 30s with dark hair and kind eyes behind designer glasses. There was something immediately striking about him. Not just his obvious wealth, but the genuine concern in his voice. "Thank you," I said, accepting my phone from his outstretched hand. "I should have been watching where I was going." "Nonsense," he replied with a smile that made my stomach flutter. I was distracted too. I just came out of a rather intense meeting with my attorneys. He handed me my lipstick and wallet, our fingers brushing briefly. There was an instant spark of connection that I hadn't felt with anyone in years. "I'm David," he said, extending his hand properly. "Sarah," I replied, shaking his hand and noticing the quality of his leather gloves. "Sarah, would you like to get a coffee? There's a place around the corner and I think we both could use something warm after that collision." Something about his smile and genuine demeanor made me say yes, despite every instinct telling me to be cautious. We walked to a small upscale cafe that I'd never noticed before, tucked between two boutiques on a side street. Over coffee and pastries, David told me he was in Hartford on business. He lived in Manhattan but was originally from London, which explained the accent. He was vague about his work, mentioning something about family business and international investments. I assumed he was probably in finance like half the men I'd met in Connecticut. What struck me most was how he listened when I talked. When I mentioned my work in financial marketing, he asked thoughtful questions about my strategies and perspectives. He seemed genuinely interested in my opinions, not just making polite conversation. "You're very insightful about market psychology," he said after I explained a campaign I'd developed. "That kind of understanding is rare, especially in someone so young." I found myself telling him things I'd never shared with anyone. Not the trauma of the wedding, but my dreams and ambitions. How I wanted to build something meaningful with my career. How I believed in the power of authentic communication to build trust with clients. David shared some of his own challenges with managing family expectations and business pressures. There was something in his eyes when he talked about family that resonated with my own recent experiences, though he didn't go into details. When we finally looked up, the cafe was preparing to close. We'd been talking for over 2 hours and it felt like 20 minutes. "I don't suppose you'd be free for dinner tomorrow?" he asked as we bundled up to leave. "I'm staying in town for a few more days and I'd love to continue our conversation." I said yes, despite the voice in my head warning me to be careful. There was something about David that felt safe and exciting at the same time. Our second date was at an intimate French restaurant that I'd never been able to afford on my own. David was charming and attentive, but I started to notice details that suggested he came from serious money. The way the maitre d' greeted him by name, despite him claiming to rarely visit Hartford. The casual way he ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly groceries. The fact that he paid the check without even glancing at the amount. "David," I said as we walked to his car, a sleek BMW that definitely wasn't a rental, "what exactly do you do for work?" He was quiet for a moment and I could see him choosing his words carefully. My family owns several businesses, he said finally. Import-export, real estate, some manufacturing. I handle the American operations. It sounded vague but I didn't press. Rich people were often secretive about their wealth, and I was too caught up in the romance of it all to ask the hard questions. Over the next 3 months, David and I fell deeply in love. He would fly up from New York every weekend, staying at the Hartford Marriott and taking me to restaurants and cultural events I'd only dreamed of experiencing. He bought me thoughtful gifts, not flashy jewelry, but books by authors I'd mentioned wanting to read, tickets to shows I'd expressed interest in seeing. More importantly, he made me feel valued in ways my family never had. He celebrated my work achievements, encouraged my professional goals, and treated me like an equal partner in our relationship. When I told him about getting another promotion at Maria's firm, he insisted on taking me to celebrate at the most exclusive restaurant in Hartford. "I'm so proud of you," he said over champagne, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "You're building something incredible with your career." It was the first time in my adult life that someone had said they were proud of me and actually meant it. In March, David finally told me the full truth about his background. His family didn't just own several businesses. They owned a multinational corporation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His full name was David Wellington Hayes, and he was the heir to an empire that included shipping, real estate, and technology investments across 3 continents. "I wanted you to know me as just David first," he explained as we sat in his hotel suite overlooking the Connecticut River. "Too many people see the money before they see the person." I understood completely. In a strange way, our relationship had been built on both of us hiding from our family's expectations and judgments. By April, David was talking about our future together. He wanted me to move to New York to be part of his life there. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I had no idea that this relationship was about to give me the ultimate opportunity to show my family exactly who they'd discarded. By May 2024, almost 3 years after Emma's wedding, David and I were inseparable. He had proposed during a romantic weekend in the Hamptons, presenting me with a stunning vintage engagement ring that had belonged to his grandmother. The proposal was intimate and perfect, exactly what I'd always dreamed of but never expected to experience. "Sarah," he had said as we walked along the private beach behind his family's estate, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You see me for who I am, not what I represent. Will you marry me?" When I said yes through happy tears, I felt like I was finally stepping into the life I was meant to have. This wasn't just about marrying a wealthy man. It was about joining a partnership with someone who truly valued me. The wedding planning began immediately. David's mother, Catherine Wellington Hayes, flew in from London to meet me. I was nervous about impressing this sophisticated woman who moved in circles of European aristocracy and international business leaders. But Catherine surprised me with her warmth and genuine interest in my background and career. "David has told me so much about your work in financial communications," she said over lunch at an exclusive club in Manhattan. "I'm quite impressed by your achievements. Building a successful career independently shows real character." It was such a contrast to how my own family had dismissed my professional accomplishments. Catherine actually wanted to hear about my strategies and insights, treating me like an intelligent equal rather than a charity case. However, there was one significant complication: the prenuptial agreement. David's family attorney, a distinguished man named Charles Pemberton, explained that it was standard practice for the Wellington Hayes family. The prenup would protect the family's centuries-old assets while still ensuring my financial security. "It's not personal, Miss Chin," Mr. Pemberton assured me in his Park Avenue office. "Every Wellington Hayes spouse has signed a similar agreement. It simply clarifies financial arrangements and protects both parties." The prenup was incredibly complex, spanning nearly 40 pages of legal language. But the basic terms were clear. I would receive a substantial settlement if the marriage ended, along with ongoing support, but I wouldn't have access to the core family trusts and business holdings. David was apologetic about the whole process. "I hate that we have to deal with this legal nonsense," he said as we reviewed the documents together. "But it's just a formality. I love you, Sarah, and I want to spend my life with you regardless of what any contract says." I understood the necessity of the prenup from a business perspective. What I didn't expect was how news of my engagement would eventually reach my estranged family. In June, I was at my favorite coffee shop in Hartford when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. "Sarah, this is Emma. I heard about your engagement. We need to talk. Can you call me?" I stared at the message for a full minute, my hands trembling. After 3 years of complete silence, now my sister wanted to talk? The timing was suspiciously convenient. Against my better judgment, I called her back. "Sarah." Emma's voice was overly bright, artificially enthusiastic. "Oh my God, I can't believe you're getting married." Mom told me she saw the announcement in the Hartford Courant. David Wellington Hayes. Wow, that's incredible. They hadn't reached out because they missed me or regretted how they'd treated me. They'd reached out because they'd discovered I was marrying into serious money. "How did Mom see the announcement?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Oh, you know Mom," Emma laughed nervously. "She still reads the society pages religiously. When she saw your name, she couldn't believe it. The Wellington Hayes family is legendary, Sarah. Their company is worth hundreds of millions." The conversation continued for 20 awkward minutes. Emma peppered me with questions about David, about the wedding, about where we'd live. She kept mentioning how excited everyone was to hear my good news, and how they'd love to reconnect. Not once did she acknowledge the 3 years of silence. Not once did she apologize for the humiliation at her wedding. She acted as if we'd simply lost touch naturally, not as if they'd deliberately cut me out of the family. "We'd love to meet David," Emma said as the conversation wound down. "Maybe we could all have dinner when you're in town? I'm sure Mom and Dad would love to see you both." I hung up feeling nauseated. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. When they thought I was a failure, I was invisible. Now that I was marrying wealth, suddenly I was family again. Over the next few weeks, the attempted reconciliation efforts intensified. My mother called, crying about how much she'd missed me, and how sorry she was that we'd drifted apart. My father sent a formal email requesting a meeting to discuss family matters. Even relatives I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out through social media. David noticed my distress and finally asked me to tell him the whole story. One evening in his Manhattan penthouse, I shared everything: the wedding humiliation, the systematic exclusion, the 3 years of silence. His face grew darker as I spoke. "Sarah," he said when I finished, "those people aren't your family. Family doesn't treat each other that way. Family doesn't abandon you and then come crawling back when it's convenient." His support meant everything to me, but I still felt conflicted about how to handle my family's sudden interest in reconciliation. The decision was made for me in July when I received a call from my mother that revealed their true motivations. "Sarah, darling," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "your father and I have been thinking. Since you're marrying into such a prominent family, we want to make sure we present ourselves properly. We were wondering if David might be interested in some business opportunities with your father's company. And of course, we'd love to help plan the wedding. The Wellington Hayes family will expect a certain level of sophistication that we can provide." There was the real reason for their sudden interest. They weren't sorry for hurting me. They weren't interested in repairing our relationship. They wanted access to David's money and social connections. I made my choice in that moment. "Mom," I said, my voice steady and strong, "I signed David's prenuptial agreement last week. It's ironclad and comprehensive. Even if something happened to our marriage, I won't have access to the family wealth you're so interested in. And as for the wedding, we've already planned an intimate ceremony with people who actually care about us." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Furthermore," I continued, feeling years of suppressed anger and hurt finally finding their voice, "I remember exactly how you treated me at Emma's wedding. I remember every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment you made me feel worthless. The fact that you think you can waltz back into my life now because I'm marrying money is exactly why you won't be at my wedding." My mother started to protest, but I cut her off. "I'm not the failure you painted me as. I built a successful career on my own. I found love with someone who values me for who I am, not what I can provide. And I don't need your validation or your presence in my life anymore." I hung up and blocked their numbers. 3 months later, David and I had our wedding, a beautiful, intimate ceremony in the gardens of his family's Hamptons estate. 50 guests who genuinely loved and supported us celebrated our union. My book club friends were there, beaming with pride. Maria gave a touching speech about watching me grow into my full potential. David's family welcomed me warmly as their newest daughter. As I stood there in my designer wedding dress, surrounded by people who truly cared about me, I realized something profound. My family's humiliation at Emma's wedding had been the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stop seeking approval from people who would never give it and to start building a life based on my own worth. The prenup they had feared, the document that proved I wasn't marrying for money, became my badge of honor. I had chosen love over wealth, authentic connection over social climbing. David and I were building something real together, something that had nothing to do with his family's fortune and everything to do with the people we were when we were together. 6 months after our wedding, I heard through mutual acquaintances that my family was still telling anyone who would listen about their successful daughter Sarah, who married into the Wellington Hayes family. They had completely rewritten the narrative, claiming credit for my happiness and success. I didn't care anymore. Their opinion of me, whether positive or negative, had no power over my life. I had learned the most important lesson of all. The only validation that matters is the validation you give yourself. My name is Sarah Wellington Hayes now, and this is my story of survival, transformation, and the sweetest redemption of all, living well and loving authentically, regardless of what anyone else thinks.